Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today, I am joined by author Wally Waltner. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Hello, how is everyone?
You know, we're good. And it's nice to have you on the program today to talk about writing, to talk about authorship. But first, to talk about you. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, what you do in your spare time, your favorite snack, anything you feel might be important for us to humanize you.
Oh, sounds good. I first and foremost am a storyteller, and I have been my almost my entire life. The only thing that's really changed is the medium. I am a farm kid from South Dakota and grew up 10 miles from the nearest town and spent 2 hours on a bus, both directions for much longer than I care to remember. But it was, early years, I was actually focused anything where I could, have an emotional connection. So music and theater and all of those kinds of things. I ended up going to college on a music scholarship and have a music degree. And of course, learned very quickly that it can be a very challenging path. I ended up shifting into IT when my daughter was born and needed to make some decisions about what was my vocation and what was my avocation. But even there, storytelling became important because I ended up becoming a consultant and helping people understand what they needed their technology investments to do required storytelling. What is the goal? What is the objective? Not just the how does it work, but what do I need it to accomplish? So throughout, and so I came into writing much later in life. I consider my author career starting in about 2022, and met up with the folks at Raconteur Press. And as a result, and there's this whole story behind that as well. But through that, I said, this is something that I know I have thought about in the past, and I have stories, and I started writing them down and sending them in. And after, doing that successfully about a half dozen times, Raconteur asked me if I was interested in writing long form for them. And so that's how my current novel series has came about.
That's awesome.
As far as current things, I live in Kansas City currently, have been here for 22 years. We are actually in the process of moving to North Texas to be closer to the folks there and kind of join that community. I have been married for 33 years to a wonderful woman. I have a 31-year-old daughter who lives here in town as well. And I'm looking forward to what the next few years bring.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I want to backtrack a little bit because I feel like we need to talk about how beautiful South Dakota is and how lucky you are.
Oh, flattery will get you everywhere. And of course it's funny when you are growing up in it and you're in the middle of it, you don't appreciate it the same way. It's only after I've been, after being away, and and you can appreciate what you have and what you had. My one regret that I do have is that I had I was the world's worst farm kid, and I had zero desire to take the farm on when I was of age. I was fortunate in the fact that my parents, despite being an only child, and did not put pressure on me, to do anything other than follow the path that made sense for me. But I do regret not saying, "Hey, save a few acres for me to come back to." And to maybe build on, and to maybe, to reconnect with my childhood home. Try to do the same thing today would be a bit challenging. I grew up out by Sioux Falls, so I mean, and South Dakota has two distinct cultures. It has what they call East River and West River, and so West River is much more ranching. It's where the Black Hills are. It's, and Rapid City is kind of the cultural heart of West River, whereas Sioux Falls is kind of the cultural heart of East River. And East River is more farming, and even what little sense of large townness that you get from Sioux Falls, is found there.
Interesting. I never knew that. I can't say I've been to South Dakota a lot. Maybe only once, maybe twice. I don't know. Hard to remember.
So the critical question becomes: have you been to Wall Drug?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah. God, yes. It very rapidly, as you approach kind of the ground zero of Wall Drug, it grows in its it permeates your psyche, because of all the signage and bumper stickers. And by the time you're finally over there, you're like, I gotta go. I have to go to this place. I actually need to go to this place before I go to Custer State Park or to Wind Cave or to the Badlands or Mount Rushmore. For whatever reason, you're like, I'm going to pop into Wall Drug real quick. That's just, what it is.
Where do you think Bucky's got the idea?
Well, if there's a good idea, run with it.
Exactly. When I point that out to folks, it's kind of like the light comes on.
Yeah, and what I assume, no, I shouldn't, but I'm going to, that you've probably gone through the world's biggest truck stop on I-80 in Iowa as well, I would assume,
There are very few roads in the Midwest that I have not traveled, I'll be quite honest.
Yeah, well, you got to drive. There's another bit of overlap for us. I didn't go to school for music, but I played music for a long time. Mm-hmm. What did you play? What did you perform? I assume you weren't just studying theory 8 hours a day, or maybe you were.
Oh Lord, yeah, no, I was not a composition major. But no, I actually play the brass family. I started on the low end of the register. I play tuba and euphonium. But I can play pretty much all of anything that has a metal mouthpiece that involves, focusing Bronx shears into a metal tube is something I'm capable of playing. So, and it's fascinating because you start with, when you start with an instrument that has kind of this stereotypical image around it of German men in lederhosen, playing, doing oomph and pahs, and then you hear someone who really has talent. So, and for me, that transformative moment was hearing the Canadian brass for the first time. Chuck Dallenbach, who is still their tuba player after he was done his entire career there. The ability to play the kinds of things that he plays, Flight of the Bumblebee, and other it opened my eyes at a young age to, oh, okay, it's not because I'm not musical, it's because I can, this is the best place for me to find my voice. And so I threw myself into it and kind of embraced, the identity of being a low brass player, and and that's where I was going. And I was fully intent on playing professionally, either in an orchestra or in a military band. And that was what I was pursuing. After I got my degree.
So you mentioned not being a music composition major, but you have more recently turned over to storytelling and writing. Maybe tell us a little bit about the deep time history. Was that something that you were doing when you were a kid while you were also doing music? Were you writing? For me, I really didn't write a lot as a kid. I wrote songs and stuff in bands, But like writing stories, traditional editorial, and that kind of came up more later as I got into reporting and working for print publications and stuff. But maybe it's different for you.
For me, writing was just another way of expressing myself. I did have an angsty teenage poetry phase, and I also ended up on things like school newspaper, and I was editor of school newspaper my junior and senior year. So I always had the capacity to write because I enjoyed reading. When you live 10 miles from the nearest town, and your choices for entertainment, and I lived in an era where there were exactly 3 television stations, and maybe a fourth when the wind was blowing from the right direction. So books and reading became necessary as a way of entertaining myself. Literally reading the encyclopedia because there is nothing else, that I haven't read already. And then being able to go to school library, the small town library, and those kinds of things. That was because I exposed myself to what good writing was, being able to write well kind of translated.
Who were you reading as a kid? Who are some of your favorite authors or books?
Early on, certainly a little bit of everything. My parents, took what they could in order to, for like Scholastic Book Club and those kinds of things. In terms of reading stories beyond kind of those those children literature, books, the first thing I remember is a short story collection of Isaac Asimov from our library, and that was what started getting me into science fiction. I was also watching with my dad, the first run syndications of Star Trek: The Original Series, and and sitting on my dad's lap and flinching during the intro when the Enterprise would fly by. Even though I knew it was coming, it was just became a thing. So for me, but I would, I found myself reading anything, and whether, the other, author that I remember devouring in my school library when I got, into middle school was Agatha Christie, because our school librarian, Mrs. Hofer, had, almost the entire, Agatha Christie collection in those old school, durable bound copies, so that your kids weren't destroying them every year. I remember plowing through Louis L'Amour, from the school library. I remember, and then a little bit later was when I discovered, and I was looking at other science fiction authors. In high school English, my high school English teacher actually assigned to 2001, my sophomore year, which I thought was amazing because I keep hearing how everyone is like, oh God, do I have to read Great Gatsby again? And it's like, I got lucky. I never had to do that. I got to read Arthur Clarke. It's like, and so but I will say probably the book that really anchored me in terms of how I thought about the world and what really I thought we were going was The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And from there, I just devoured Heinlein, as much as I could.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's wild to hear the different influences people draw from.
And it was interesting because, I'm writing fantasy, but it really wasn't until later that, and later in high school and in college that I started reading fantasy, more, a lot. I will say most of high school was devoured again, Star Trek. I was reading that in the 80s, Penguin had that series, that really long series of original series tie-in books. And I had them all. because I was going to, because I would go to Walden Books, another way of dating myself, and pick up the next one. They were practically coming out every few weeks, and so I had about 100 of them by the time, things were all said and done. So, but those had some really good. Honestly, there were some really good authors, coming, of the modern, coming out of that. But because I think about people like Vonda McIntyre and Diane Duan and even Peter David and folks like that. And then I was also reading Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and I came to Narnia later than most kids do, but was was fascinated by it.
Who have you been reading lately?
Well, so I try to read a lot of the folks that that are belong that I that have been part of my journey into writing. I read almost all of Larry Correia. I read almost everything of Travis Corcoran. I read a lot of Robert Crusoe. Folks, in that sphere, there's so many wonderful folks in this kind of community that has built up around Rack Press. You've got Cedar Sanderson, you've got you've got T.C. Ross, you've got Kenton Pierce, you've got just so much talent that that you wouldn't know otherwise.
What attracts you in modern releases in the same way that it did when you were younger, discovering the material that you liked or that you were drawn to?
I don't want to reduce it to nostalgia, but I do think, and I'd rather look at the fact that there are some timeless principles that sometimes get lost in modern media or are deconstructed in modern media, and a return to those things that inspired me in younger years or and influenced me are things that I want to see out in the conversation today for young people to discover, and not in a dated fashion, but in a contextually relevant way for younger generations.
Do you think that the indie literature community is picking up that baton?
Yes, I do. And one of the beautiful things about indie is that you can write whatever you want. You might, and you may end up writing to and you write to the audience that you want reading you. You say, I write the things that I want to read. Therefore, my readers are folks that would read the things that I want to read. So there is this interlocking set of communities of people who realize that they value the same things, and that spreads. So not everyone. The thing about indie is you can write whatever you want, and you can put it out for an audience, and the audience that you want will attract themselves to it. And we'll set aside financials for a moment, and just talk about writing as community building, and I find that for me personally satisfactory, and the fact that people are willing to pay, and give me money for that is just icing on the cake.
Had you been an indie creative before getting into writing? Now I realize, you were doing music during college, but and pardon my barbarity here, but I don't know a lot of teenagers and 20-somethings with tuba in their band. But maybe the South Dakota scene was a little different. You tell me.
Have you not read Bloom County?
I mean, the comic? Yeah.
Yes. So Opus is a tuba player in a rock band with Bill.
Come on. Yeah, I love the example. You got me against the wall here, but
well, in all fairness, now, of course, if you are not, with the choice of instrument, I have it is doable. Maybe not so much in rock, but certainly is it's been done in jazz. And again, to me, one of the draws of that community is we can, is going out and proving that we can play the same music and we can be the same, expressive, the same levels of expression. I ended up, because I have having a classical education, but also being growing up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, a strong appreciation for modern music as well. And so I find myself, in fact, I remember an interview I did for the paper in Sioux Falls, and just asking me, because I was I was the youngest member of the Sioux Falls Municipal Band, which was a professional group, and I was getting paid, good money, to play 3 concerts a week in the summer and practice twice a week. And they asked me, so what do you like? And I said, anything from Beethoven to Beastie Boys, and any opportunity to play. I've played polka bands. I've played jazz. I'm part of the worship team at church, and I play trombone, but I play in our pit orchestra, and I sing in both choir and on worship team. So the thing about music, and the thing about the arts in general, and is that it is a lifetime thing. It's not, sports can be a lifetime thing, but there are physical limits. And whereas music and art and and reading are things that you can carry with you, all the way into into the very later parts of your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I dig that. That's the interesting thing about being young and being a musician. I played bass, like string bass, coming up when I was in school. So did the jazz band thing, did orchestra, symphonic band, marching band. I would switch over to percussion. But there's only so many people playing, tuba, sousaphone, or bass, these low end types of instruments. These, as a teenager, they're obscure, kind of. You're familiar with them, but it's not like violin. It's not trumpet. These very kind of like, I don't know what term I would use, but very typical instruments that kids get started
the cool
with.
kids instruments. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if they're the cool kids, but they're certainly the instruments that I feel like are kind of the ones that a lot of people start with. But it gives you an opportunity when you're on these other, I don't want to say niche instruments because they're not, but there's not a line at them. So when the people are looking for a player, there's only so many people to draw from. So you end up, kind of regularly, everybody wants to play clarinet or whatever, or guitar, and there's many fewer people doing the other stuff. Let us transition the conversation over into what you're releasing right now, what you are promoting right now. Muse's War, Fugue of Fire, coming out on Raconteur Press. What should we know without giving away too many spoilers or anything that might make people not want to pick up the first piece of this? And we'll get into some of the other things you're doing with the series in terms of the naming scheme and stuff, but anything you want people to know about.
So Fugue of Fire in particular, and Muses War in general, is a story about the place of art in society. So we've talked about this identity, how we build these identities as creative people. And the question that I ask is, what if creativity was a supernatural source of power? And part of what Fugue of Fire is doing is exploring in three very distinct ways how people wrestle with that question and try to and when you build a society that where art and beauty is so infused into the culture, and then you realize that something is wrong, how do you address it? What do you do in response to that? And so, there has been a cataclysmic event that is the climax of the first book, and people are now responding to that and figuring out what they mean from it. You have a church, elder who is now questioning, many of the choices that he's what he's come to believe, and he's brave enough to stand in front of his leadership and say, we've gone astray and we need to fix this. And it is literally, it is very much a fantasy reformation with theses nailed to the wall and to the door and the whole 9 yards. You have a smith who feels personal failure at the because of the destruction of the Sword of State, and and their participation even under duress in that process, and wants to make amends. You have a noble woman who has a daughter afflicted by one of the effects of this of this conspiracy, of this events, and is willing to do pretty much anything to, including in order to save her child, and makes an impossible choice. All of that is heading towards heading towards an end, that, and you realize that there's something larger going on.
Very cool. Yeah. This is I didn't expect to have all of the previous conversation kind of tie in to what you're doing with the book. That was purely happenstance, luck of the draw, I suppose.
Well, the cliche is write what you know.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, that's true, but on the other hand, I have had this identity as a storyteller, as a creative in various mediums my entire life, and these are questions I've thought about. When we talk about, and people, when you look at society and you look at the various ways of creation, and you see the various ways that creativity is, it can be frowned upon even, or not to taste, or you do the popular thing, or you must do, all of that kind of stuff. When it was interesting because, and I've always been attracted to, so one of the other things that we haven't gotten into about myself, part of, a storyteller, is that I got involved in role-playing games relatively early. Not original D&D, but second edition is where second advanced second ed is where I started. But I've been playing role games and GMing for a large part of my life, and so that's a form of storytelling.
Absolutely,
on both sides of the screen. And so, and I've always been attracted to bard characters. I've always been attracted to performers, and then the other layer that kind of comes into that kind of informs this story in general, is that I've been involved in historical recreation. I've been a member of the Society for Creative Anachronisms, and in my persona when I did that in my 20s and early 30s was it was one of a bard, and so I have and now add influences of Tolkien and Lewis, and even late, and others that, names that flash, as I think about it, Mercedes Lackey, and so all, and Anne McCaffrey. You think of all of those things, that kind of pour in, that kind of contribute to a story that is not so much about big men with swords going out and fighting battles. There's some of that, but there's also the culture, and it's, and I'm not knocking it, but what I'm focusing on is something more inward focused and yet expressive and important, because what are the things that we take up swords and go to war for?
I really like the premise of your series. I particularly like the cover art for Overture of Shadow. I hope, and I haven't seen it yet, I hope that the new one looks as good or even better. Man,
I think it does. Yeah, I am so lucky to have had the chance to work with Cedar Sanderson on these things, and the collaboration, and you look at both the covers and the interior art. Yeah, one of the things about working with Raconteur in general is they get me. Yeah, and again, it's that self-selection of community, and and wanting to have fun, and wanting to tell good stories, and wanting heroes to be heroes, and and wanting the good guys to win, and wanting to to promote the good, the true, and the beautiful. Which, and so it's, and appealing to folks that have not necessarily gotten a lot of attention in the storytelling arena recently.
Tell us a little bit about curating the Muse Within Us anthology for Raconteur Press.
So I've been very lucky, to for Raconteur to kind of embrace this concept of creativity, and how it can be, how a supernatural influence on creativity creates inspiration from uncanny sources. So I've created an entire fantasy universe around that concept, but it's certainly not the first time that's happened. You go back to play, even as far back as The King in Yellow, and similar, or The Portrait of Dorian Gray, or things along that line. Even Ursula Le Guin explored that. Charles de Lint explored it, and so the ability to take a set of stories where a song or a sculpture or a poem is touched or even possessed by supernatural forces, where the inspiration itself comes from uncanny sources. It's coming from muses, or it's coming from cursed artifacts, or it's coming from patrons, or it's coming from the cosmic, whatever, and how that changes, or the creator. And so I got so many. I had enough stories for 3 volumes. I really did. And the process of cutting it down to 10 was just, was agonizing. I will also have a story in this set in my Museverse. That story is called "The Loot That Would Not Burn," and I'm excited to share it and to and add to my universe that way. So, but I think it's a great set of stories, and I hope that readers will agree.
And when does that come out?
That will come out June 5th. So we're looking forward to adding that to the Raconteur Press anthology collection.
Fantastic. Wally, are there any things that we have not yet talked about that you feel are critical to get off your mind, or that we missed completely in the conversation prior?
Actually, I think what we have is, if what we've talked about appeals to you, the idea of, the of fantasy being, holistic, in the sense of it's not, of it is about how a society and a culture develop, and how, we look to the creators in our society to hold a mirror back, in front of us, and see who we are, and see what we can, and more importantly, what we aspire to be. um it's interesting. This idea for this story has been in my head for a long time. When I started to take writing more seriously, as a lot of folks or a lot of my friends have, I was regularly listening to the Writer Dojo, Larry Curieta and Steve Diamond's podcast, which, cross our fingers, may be coming back in the next few months. But I remember specifically they had a guest who, and his name was Craig Nybo, who was a professional musician, and they called the episode "The Rhythm of Writing." And Steve had asked Craig how he would incorporate his musical knowledge into a story, and Craig had a very good answer about how you could use Western music theory as a structure to create a magic system, and and how you could use, both keys and modes and motifs to be able to make that work. And it was a wonderful answer. And it was the moment that crystallized that, yes, I'm doing this. I didn't do anything that Craig said, but I did, but it started the what if and then what, kinds of conversations in my own head that made it work. There are a lot of musical influences in both the world building and in the story itself. We talk about how the books, the series names itself are as if you were reading, the movements of a symphony: Overture of Shadow, Fugue of Fire, and like I said, Fugue has three main stories going through it, telling the same story, which is what the structure of a fugue is. The third book is going to be called Scherzo of Madness, and there will be madness, I promise you. And then the final book is called Finale of Radiance. And so I am, in literary form, composing a symphony. I also intend to put together a short story collection, some of which have been published in previous Raconteur anthologies, that I intend to call Intermezzo.
There you go.
So again, kind of following that, my characters. So my primary protagonist is named Dorian, and if you've got a musical background, you will recognize that Dorian is a name of one of the musical modes of Western theory. And I did manage, yeah. So, and yes, Lydian is the love interest. Phrygian is the religious scholar who is who is a focus of one of the storylines in Fugue of Fire. The antagonist in the first book was Locrian. So I made a point to weave those things in, and they work. They work as names, but they also signal, this is meant to be a musical, lyrical book and story.
Yeah, I'm into it. I got to catch up. I like the premise. I like the mechanics.
I will be excited to hear, especially given, I will be curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to catch up. Here's a question for you. These are only print and ebook. You don't have audiobooks out yet.
Correct. I think so. I would love to do audio, and even if I have to narrate it myself, and maybe get a little, and do a little help with it. It is something that it is something that I know Raconteur is thinking about, and but want, as with everything they do, and this is one of the things I truly appreciate about them, they want to do it right, and they want to make sure is as advantageous for the author as possible.
Yeah.
Raconteur is the most author-friendly publisher in the market today, and I will die on that hill.
That's what I've been hearing in the course of all these interviews. Now, Fugue of Fire, when is it coming out? Where can people find it?
It comes out on May 14th in ebook, I think, and officially the paperback is May 15th. So we are recording on the 13th, so tomorrow.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, excellent.
So by the time this hits the airwaves and the internet and the aether, and I use that word, kind of slyly and almost Easter eggish, it will be out and available for you at Amazon.
Wally, great conversation. Fantastic to meet you. It's nice to talk to somebody combining different creative outlets into something new.
All art to me is interconnected in some way, because it's drawing on the same idea. What is beauty and why does it matter to me? And there's so many ways to express, and so why limit yourself?
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you for taking the time, and we will talk again before too long.
I really appreciate the opportunity.